Bridge to all decks. Welcome aboard Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve. I'm Scott Nance, and I have to say, Steve Morris, that was an amazing intro you put together. Bravo to you. That was really awesome and exciting to watch.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It was fun and challenging, and I'm glad that we're actually doing a live show where people can see our faces. We can see each other. It's very, very exciting.
This is very exciting for everyone who's been following along, for all of our Enterprisers who've been there with Enterprise Incidents since day one. First of all, thank you so much for being aboard Enterprise Incidents and joining us on this incredible journey through the original series. So yes, this is what Scott Nance looks like. And that's what Steve Morris looks like. So you can finally see our faces. If you're watching us on YouTube, of course, if you are listening to us on the variety of different podcast platforms, well, you can still hear our voices and it's business as usual. So what we wanted to do before we delve into the animated series, which is going to be a whole new thing for Enterprise Incidents.
Yes.
We wanted to give the original series one last hurrah by counting down our favorite episodes of the original series. Now, Steve Morris.
Yes.
I know you and I are going to have some episodes on our list that are similar. And
yes.
we have some that are different. So how is this going to work?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, I want to say I've never tried to put together my actual top 10 list in order. It was really hard. It was really hard to do. And here's what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is that both of us have been listening to each other talk about our favorite Star Trek episodes for a couple of years, actually several years now, even before the show started. And so I think we maybe have a pretty good idea of what each other's guesses are. So we are going to start not with our own top 10 list, but we are going to start by trying to predict each other's top 10 list.
Well, before we get into that, I want to just ask you a question, Steve Morris. You
Yes.
said that this is the first time you ever actually put together your top 10 list together. So my question for you is, like, what was that like for you? And more importantly, how do you think your list would have been different if we had not done Enterprise Incidents?
Oh, that is an interesting question. Well, the thing about the sorry, I am getting over COVID, so I have a little bit of a cough left. The thing about putting the list together was that the top three were easy. The top three I pretty much knew, and after 5 minutes, I put them in an order, and they pretty much stayed that way. The next 7 were almost impossible because there are like 20-ish at least episodes that I think are absolutely fantastic. And so they kept going in and out. And then literally 15 minutes before we jumped on here, I went, that can't be at number 4. I had to move that down. I had to move that one up. No, wait, hold on, do this. It was really, really hard. But actually, I don't think this list is substantially different from what it would have been before we did the show. I think the ones, my true loves of my favorite episodes, they've remained pretty constant. What about you?
Well, for me, it was interesting because over the course of these last 80 episodes of the original series, I would always go onto the different Facebook groups, including our own Facebook page, Enterprise Incidents, and I would say the name of an episode, and so many Enterprisers would say, oh, that's number 17 on my list, or that's number 3 on my list. So it sounds like a lot of Enterprisers already have not just ranked their top 10, but ranked their 80 episodes, if you include the page. And I'm like, in all my life, since I first discovered Star Trek when I was 6 years old in 1974, a member of the syndication generation, I never actually went through and ranked all 80 episodes. So that sounds like a really good idea to do. But what I will say to answer your question is that I do think that my list changed slightly from if I would have ranked it before we did Enterprise Incidents. The reason I say that is because there is an episode on my list that when we got to this episode, I said, oh my God, this is in my top 3 favorite episodes of all time. And then when I put this list together, it actually went down a few notches. It's still in my top 5, but it is not in my top 3 or my top, or it's not in my top, it's in my top 10, but not in my top 5 or my top 3.
Wow.
But I do agree with you that I have so many honorable mentions.
Yeah.
That you could take those honorable mentions that I have and put a whole new top 10 list together just based on those honorable mentions. And it would stand alongside my new list, my new top 10 list, and be just as good. Because, like you and I have talked about so many times, especially you've said that here are these 80 episodes of Star Trek, of the original series, and the ratio of great episodes to not so great ones or just okay ones is actually very, very strong and holds up after more than 5 decades. So I think that's what's most fascinating to me is that I had I had twice as many honorable mentions than on my actual top 10, and any one of those could have replaced the top 10.
Yeah.
Still would have had a very, very, very strong list.
Well, now I'm very curious about that number 3. Would you like to hear my predictions for the Scott Mance top 10?
Oh, this is going to be really interesting. So you're going to predict what you think I have
That's
on my
right.
top 10. Oh, this is
Now,
different.
Now, the top 1 and 2, you've said before. Now, so unless they've changed, I have a good sense that I know what those are. But here, and I will explain my reasoning as I go.
Okay.
So at number 10, we have an episode which was your last favorite episode of the series, and that is All Our Yesterdays, one that I know that you love, that you really, really care about. In particular, the Spock and McCoy scenes, I know are ones that you absolutely love.
Steve, you are
Yeah.
not only correct that All Our Yesterdays is in my top 10, but it is my number 10 episode. Keep going.
Wow. Okay. Well, at number 9, I've picked one that I don't think would have been in your top 10 before we did our show. Or do you want to go back and forth? Do you want to give my number 10? What you think my number 10 is?
Great idea. Okay, so my prediction for your number 10, just like you, okay, your prediction for my number 10 was that I felt like it was the last truly great episode of the series.
Yes.
Now, I know that you have an episode that you consider your last favorite great episode of the series. And that puts my prediction for your number 10 as let that be your last Battlefield.
Scott, I got to tell you, it is not a bullseye, but that is one that went on and off the list. That is currently my number 11.
Oh, I was so close.
But it could have been number 10. It easily could have been number 10. Well, so my number 9 for you is one that I don't think would necessarily have made your list before we did the show, but you had such a huge emotional response to it that I speculate it might have gone on the list, and that is The Empath.
Okay, just like you, when I got past number 5, I really struggled
with
what to include on these next 5, 6 through 10. The Empath was one of those episodes because I think of any episode we covered here on Enterprise Incidents, that was the one that I really had a very visceral, emotional reaction to, where I remember you were like, "Are you okay? Do you want to stop?" And I'm like, No, this is great. Let's keep going. Honorable mention, not on my list.
Gotcha. All right, okay. Where do you think my number 9 was?
Number 9 for you, okay, and I could be wrong on the ranking, but this is an episode that I put on your top 10 because I know you love it, but I put it on your top 10 because it's an episode you referenced many times in terms of the evolution of Spock, the evolution of the relationship between Kirk and Spock, because of a crucial scene that happens in the briefing room when the stakes are high in the final act, and that is the naked time.
Scott, let me tell you something. You and I know each other pretty damn well, I think, because my number 9 episode is The Naked Time, sir.
Yes. All right. This is excellent. Okay. So, all right. Number 9. I got your actual number 9 at number 9. That is very, very impressive. Well, let's keep going.
All right. Some of these are definitely kind of, guesses, but I chose as your number 8 episode, an episode that is critical in the evolution of Spock, critical in the evolution of the relationships with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and that is Amok Time.
Unbelievable. I swear to God, you are on fire. You are amazing.
Really?
Not only is Amok Time on my top 10 list, Steve Morris, it is number 8. Wow.
What? Okay.
Well, you know what, Steve? Listen, after these intense deep dives, these 2 or 3 hour conversations that we've had for almost 2 years, I would hope that you and I would kind of have a good judge of the episodes that we were going with here. So yes, Amok Time is my number 8.
Okay, that's crazy.
That is crazy. Okay,
That's crazy.
so my prediction for your number 8 is an episode I have a little higher on my list, but just sort of getting a feel for what I think you have on yours. This is an episode that I know we talked about really early on when we were first starting all of this, that this is an episode that you always hailed as a great episode, one of your favorites, which is ironic because it is the second pilot of Star Trek ever, and that is Where No Man Has Gone Before.
You're not going to believe this.
What?
That is my number 8.
No. You gotta be kidding me.
No, that is my number 8.
Oh my God. This is awesome.
So let me just say, Scott and I, right before we jumped on, in fact, one of the reasons we were a minute or two late was we were saying, well, how should we do this? Should we do our predictions at the end, at the beginning, back and forth? What are we going to do? And our assumption was that I think that we would get a lot of these wrong because we would still have a top 10 list to reveal. And at this point, we're mostly accurate about each other's top 10, which is crazy. That's nuts. I will say what my number 7 is. This is an episode, again, of course, I know it's redundant to say that I know you love it because of course you love it. But it is also, I think, particularly for you, the archetypal Klingon episode, the episode that defines the Klingons more than any other and has one of your favorite guest stars, and that is Day of the Dove.
My friend, you are right on the money to put that on my list. But I have Day of the Dove at number 9 on the Scott Gantz best of the original series. But yes, Day of the Dove is on the list. And by the way, when we go through, really do our countdown of our individual lists, we can get into a little more detail about why we love these. But your assessment of my feeling about Day of the Dove is right on point, and I'll say more about why. But yes, I have Day of the Dove. It is number 9 on my list. My prediction for your number 7 is an episode that I know you love, and I think when we talked about it, I actually pointed out that when it came to like the top tier episodes of the original series, like the great of the great, like an essential episode. And we had a great guest who joined us for this episode, Steve Morris. John Roca joined us for this episode, who I know is your great friend and partner on the Cinephiles. And John Roca is also the reason that you and I met, which makes Enterprise Incidents possible. So if I haven't said this enough, I am indebted to John Roca in a very, very big way for even being here talking to you. But my prediction for your number 7 is Journey to Babel.
Okay, that is the first one that is not on my. It's my second one is not on my list. That is my number 13. It kept coming up. It kept going out. It was almost at number 10 several times. Fantastic episode. My prediction for your number 6 is one of the greatest guest stars to ever appear on Star Trek, a guest star so charismatic and powerful that he was a no-brainer to bring back for the movie, and that is Space Seed.
Okay, this is where we missed the mark. Here's why. Yes, of course, I considered Space Seed for a top 10, and absolutely it is in the honorable mention. But when I went back and forth on Space Seed, and I'm really, really curious to hear what the Enterprisers say about my assessment of Space Seed, is that I love Space Seed. I think it's a great episode, and I agree with you completely that Ricardo Montalban is one of the standout guests that Star Trek ever had across more than 55 years, not just on the original series. But the reason I didn't put Space Seed on my top 10, because I was thinking really hard about it. And Steve, and we talked about this on the actual podcast for Space Seed, is does Space Seed hold up this strong without the Wrath of Khan? And I really thought hard about that. And the ultimate conclusion I came to, at least for the purpose of this best of the original series list, is that, it's a great episode, but if you take Wrath of Khan out of the equation, it's a really, really good episode with a great guest star. But like when I look at my top 10, I go, man, I feel pretty good about my top 10. So Space Seed did not land on my list. But I have this episode as your number 6.
Space Seed?
Yes.
It's my number 6.
It's your number 6. Okay, well, at least one of us had it on this list.
No, you are on the money. That's crazy. Okay. Sorry. Sorry about the coughing. This is the most I've had to talk in one sitting, so it's definitely a little bit harder. But so my number 5 on your list is an episode that you have referenced many, many times as being formative, particularly for the character of Spock and McCoy's, their relationships. It is an early on episode. It is one that I really love, and that is The Enemy Within.
I almost put that on my list. In fact, I almost took off a mock time to put The Enemy Within on my list, because I was looking at a mock time going, boy, this is a really crucial episode in the relationship between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. But The Enemy Within is really the first episode that was crucial to the relationship of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And I had that on my list, and it is my number 1 honorable mention, The Enemy Within. It's always been a favorite of mine, especially because it's such a great Kirk episode, and Shatner is amazing in 2 performances as the good Kirk and the dark Kirk. But ultimately, I went with a mock time over The Enemy Within because it's just so much more like iconic. It was the first episode that aired to launch the second season. We went to Vulcan. We had Live Long and Prosper for the first time. You have that great music score,
Yeah.
So I left Enemy Within off my list, but it is a very, very, very strong honorable mention. All right. So that was your prediction for my number 5, correct?
Yes.
Okay. My prediction for your number 5 was actually my number 8, and that is a mock time.
That is, it is on my list. It is not number 8, but we'll discuss it. It's a little bit higher on my list. So I say we'll discuss it when we do the full countdown.
Okay.
Or actually, I could say it was my number 7. So you're off by 2. You're pretty damn close.
Okay. Number 7. That's still on your list. That's good. All right. So we're now into the top tier stuff, buddy.
Yeah. So this episode is tough to pick. Excuse me. Sorry. I should have brought some lozenges in here.
Everyone watching and listening. So Steve Morris was really lucky and had survived not getting COVID all this time. Yep. Unfortunately, his number came up, but he is on the mend. He's doing great. He is joining us now, and we are just glad that, Steve, you are feeling much, much better.
Oh yeah. I honestly, I didn't get terribly sick. It's really just this lingering cough that's been a problem. But my number 4 prediction for you is the very first episode of Star Trek I heard you reference, I think, because you talked about it way back when we did Wrath of Khan. And I think it has one of the most foundational elements in terms of philosophy of Star Trek. And that is Devil in the Dark.
Oh man. See, now I feel like the admission, Steve, that this is not in my top 10 might be seen as sacrilege, given that it is so well regarded as one of the best episodes of the original series. But it just goes to show you how many, like you pointed out at the top of this conversation, how many great episodes of Star Trek actually existed, enabling someone, a diehard lifelonger like me to keep Devil in the Dark in my top tier of honorable mentions, but it was not on my list. And this was an episode. Okay, here's why. Devil in the Dark did not make my list. Actually, I'm going to hold that thought for later into this conversation, because I don't want to give something else away.
Okay.
But I'm going to move on to your number 4.
Yes.
Which is an episode that it is. I feel like if there is an episode of the original series that's truly cinematic, an episode that you could put up on the big screen and it would actually work really, really well, it's an episode I know you love, because I remember you texted me and said, this is a great episode when you did your rewatch of it. And that is The Doomsday Machine.
That is my number 4.
Number four.
I'm stunned. I'm stunned at the accuracy here. Yes, it's a fantastic episode. Obviously, we'll talk about it more, I guess, when we do our full top 10 lists.
Yep.
What a strange conversation this is, where we've gotten so many of each other's. My prediction for your number 3, again, something you mentioned. Actually, this is the first episode of Star Trek you ever mentioned to me when I met you, when we did Wrath of Khan, because it is not just the first episode of Star Trek you mentioned to me. It is the first episode of Star Trek you ever saw, and that is Mirror, Mirror.
Mirror, Mirror, Ding, Ding is on my list. It is at number 5. And
Wow.
yes, that was the episode that lit my fuse, that fired my phasers, that beamed me up, that made me go boldly into this nearly lifelong journey throughout Star Trek. Yes, Mirror, Mirror is just like the Doomsday Machine. This is an episode that I'll watch over and over and over and over and over again. I never, ever, ever get tired of it. It is so great, so iconic, one of the greatest Star Trek episodes ever made. So yes, Mirror, Mirror is my number 5. And I'm going to turn this back to you, Steve Morris, and say that your number 3 is Mirror, Mirror.
You're real close. It is definitely up in that very top. It is not my number 3, but it's fantastic, obviously. See, and now here's where I have the huge advantage, because you have said multiple times what your top 2 Star Trek episodes are. So unless I'm incorrect, your number 2 is The Conscience of the King.
Okay, ding, ding for having it on the list. But at the top of this conversation, I said there was an episode in my top 3 or top 5 that moved down a couple notches. And Conscience of the King is that episode. I was shocked, and stunned, as the Ruddles would say, that The Conscience of the King would actually move down on my list. But when you look at the others that I have on my list, you go, okay, that's okay. Because I don't think that most people have Conscience of the King on their top 10, but I do, and it still stayed there. It's my number 7, but not in my top 3 anymore. But now we are at number 2 for you. And this is an episode that for sure is regarded as the Citizen Kane of Star Trek episodes. It is widely hailed as the single greatest Star Trek episode ever made over the course of its almost 57-year history. And that is a bold statement, considering there are now about 900 episodes of Star Trek that exist. But your number 2 is The City on the Edge of Forever.
It is right. I'll just say it is my number 3, and Mirror, Mirror is my number 2. But basically, you're right there.
Yeah.
Which means, actually, I just realized that in my top 10 list for you, I didn't have City on the Edge of Forever. My guess is it's probably on there.
Oh,
but
sure.
But
sure.
I didn't write it down. That was foolish of me. Because my number 1 for you is, of course, Metamorphosis. You said many times it's your favorite episode. It is a fantastic episode. So that is my pick for your number 1.
That should come a shock to absolutely no one who has been following along Enterprise Incidents all this time. I have made no secret of my love for Metamorphosis. Subtlety, Steve, as you know, both doing Enterprise Incidents and just being great friends, subtlety is not my strong point. My love for Metamorphosis knows no bounds. I'll explain more about why as we, go into the proper countdown here. But yes, Metamorphosis is my number 1. Photo Novel number 5. My number 1 pick for you is an episode that I have.
I know you're right. I already know that you're going to pick the right one. That's my guess.
Balance of Terror.
That is correct. That is my number 1.
All right.
Yeah. So clearly, in the last 2 years, we have come to know each other pretty well.
Yes, that is really amazing. I mean, some of our picks were right on the money or close to the bullseye. And that says a lot just about how deep and intense and analytical and passionately we talked about this series, and talked about it, Steve, in a way where I saw Star Trek in a whole new light. I know you did too. Mm-hmm. And I know so many of the Enterprisers who joined us along the way have commented how looking at the original series as an evolutionary arc, as a serialized show instead of an episodic one, which was the way it was intended, and that it actually works. It actually makes sense to the point where you would swear the writers and producers actually had all of this in mind. That's just another strength of the show. So, Steve, let's talk more about your number 10. Why did you go with your number 10 as your number 10?
Well, this is one that strangely, it's so weird because normally when you tune in, we have our good friend John Roca, who has spent years doing a top 10 show. And normally the drama of a top 10 show is what's going to be number one? What's the order going to be? And it's like, well, we've already ruined a fair amount of that drama because we knew each other so well. But one episode we haven't ruined is in fact my number 10 because it hasn't been mentioned. And one of the things I was thinking about as I made my list was, yes, of course, we're trying to list the greatest Star Trek episodes, but I also was thinking about my favorite Star Trek episodes, and those two things aren't exactly the same. And one of the things I was thinking about is there is an episode that I would watch regularly just because I love it so damn much. And it is the only comedy episode that is on my list. And that is A Piece of the Action.
I love it. Piece of the Action over Trouble with Tribbles.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've never loved Trouble with Tribbles as much as everybody else. Yes, it's a great episode. I would watch Piece of the Action 5 times more often than Trouble with Tribbles. I love Piece of the Action.
I agree with you completely. When push comes to shove and you look at the true comedic episodes of Star Trek, Trouble, Tribbles, a Piece of the Action, and I Mud, and I would even say that Tomorrow Is Yesterday can be sort of deemed as a comedic episode. Maybe even the Squire of Gothos because of William Campbell's amazing performance. But if you held a gun to my head and said, or you held the phaser to my head and said, what is your favorite comedic episode of Star Trek? I would absolutely pick A Piece of the Action over the Trouble with Tribbles. And not because I don't like the Trouble with Tribbles. I do. I just think it's like one of those episodes that's been talked about so much and so many times. And while it's deserving of all those accolades, I feel like maybe A Piece of the Action doesn't get as much appreciation as it deserves. Gene Kuhn, who had already left the show at that point, he just sort of like gave Star Trek a gift by writing this comedic episode and playing to his strengths. So yes, I agree. That's a great pick for your number 10.
And what is your number 10?
My number 10, as you predicted right on the money, is All Our Yesterdays. And this is an episode that I had a much deeper fondness for leading up to our deep dive and certainly after our deep dive, not just because I really feel like it is the last great episode of the original series. And they really almost went out on the highest of notes with this one. But so much about the relationship between Kirk and Spock really came to a boil in All Our Yesterdays. I mean, you would swear that the writers knew that this was going to be the end. And they're like, we got to bring this relationship out on a really, really high note. And so much of that conflicting drama that went on after Spock and McCoy went to the past of Sarpedon and the drama with Zarabeth, that moment when Spock goes to strangle McCoy and he says, "Are you trying to kill me, Spock?" But also, and this was something that came out of our conversation, Steve, when they went back through the time portal and Kirk is trying to get in touch with the Enterprise so they can get out of there before the star goes nova. And Spock looks at McCoy and says, "You don't have to look at me that way. She's dead and gone." Like you could hear in his voice, you could hear in Spock's voice, he's almost saying, for the second time in my life, I was happy, which is, of course, a bookend to This Side of Paradise. And that is what put this episode on my number 10. Your number 9, which is...
Can I say something about that? Yeah. I want to get to Naked Time, of course, but I was just thinking, and this is the kind of thing that might get me in trouble, and I haven't thought through it all, but I'm just going to put it out there and say it, which is I think one of the things that makes great episodes of Star Trek great, and that is different from Star Wars, and I'm not trying to start a Star Wars versus Star Trek thing. I love Star Wars. I'm a big fan of Star Wars. They're very different, but one of the big differences that occurs to me as you were talking about those incredible scenes with Spock and McCoy is that the great episodes of Star Trek are ones where the actors get to shine and really show how good they are in terms of their characters and their understanding. It's really about character moments. And if you think whether, as you mentioned, This Side of Paradise or City on the Edge of Forever, or all those ones, yes, they have great science fiction ideas and all this interesting stuff going on or good action, but it's really about the actors' performances. And I don't think that's true of Star Wars in the same way. Not that I don't love Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill and Alec Guinness and all of the lots and lots of great actors who have appeared in Star Wars, but it isn't exactly the same thing in terms of the characters and the actors shining in those roles. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Look, I love Star Wars. I mean, of course, I'm right up there, and I'm an OG Star Wars fan from when I saw the original film in '77. And I mean, the original trilogy was just such a landmark thing. But I feel like Star Trek and Star Wars, it's like the Beatles and the Stones. You can love both. They are both very different. Star Trek is science fiction. Star Wars is fantasy, science fantasy. Star Trek is about us and our potential and our future. Okay. And Star Wars is in a galaxy far, far away. You can love them both. They both are great characters. But, and again, this is another thing that just makes me go, wow, Steve, you are so right on point. The way these actors, they knew their characters, and the best moments of Star Trek are when those characters shine. And that is a beautiful way to really sum up why the original series holds up after all of this time. Speaking of time, The Naked Time is your number 9.
So we talked about we talked about the emotional response you had to the empath. The biggest emotional response I had in the entire time of us doing this podcast was actually to that scene in the briefing room in The Naked Time. Mm-hmm. It was Spock saying, "When I think of you as a friend, I feel ashamed." Like that was so moving to me when I was working on it for the show. Like, I burst into tears watching it. And I remember when we did the show, like, I had a hard time saying those words because they're so profound. And there's just such deep pain there for Spock, and his performance in that scene is incredible. And then when you get to the sacrifices that Kirk has made in terms of being captain of the ship, and how those inform everything else that happens after. Like, that basic idea of duty over your personal life is so fundamental to Star Trek. So yeah, that had to be on my top 10.
And yeah, the other thing about The Naked Time that makes it so great is how there's so many tonal shifts in the actual course of the 50 minutes. The first act is, very, very straightforward Star Trek. Then the fun and playful. And then by the last act, the stakes are very high. This is not a game anymore. Like we're in very, very serious trouble. And you really feel the Enterprise literally teetering on the edge of destruction as the people within it are going through their own personal destructions. It's a marvelous episode written by John D. F. Black. My number 9, Day of the Dove, which you correctly predicted on my list, is the only other third season episode on my top 10. And I really wanted to be sure to give the third season some love on my best of list, because, Steve, another thing that was a really, really big revelation to me throughout our conversations is how strong the third season actually is. It's not the disaster that sort of mythology had sort of made it out to be. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend, and the legend was printed that the third season was bad. Well, we proved that the third season is really, really good, especially the first half of it. And Day of the Dove is one of those episodes. It's a taut, tense, well-acted, exciting, action-packed episode with a message that was very apropos for 1968. Stop the war now or spend forever in futile, bloody violence. And Michael Ansara, as you predicted, as you pointed out, is one of my favorite guest stars. As much as I love John Colicos as a core, I feel like Michael Ansara. And for everyone watching along with us, so all our usual friends, Michael Shires, Mike Bamono, Sergio, Sub Commander Tal, I see you all in the comment section here. I know you will agree with me that when it comes to the quintessential Klingon, the Klingon that paved the way for the way the Klingons will be depicted in the Next Generation and beyond, Michael Ansara's performance as Kang is that Klingon. And that is one of the reasons why Day of the Dove is my number 9.
But by the way, speaking of our comment section, because of course we're both looking at all these comments, and this one cracked me up. Let's see if I can hit the button right. Oh, nope, I hit the wrong one. That was not the one I meant. Oh, and I hit another wrong one. Things keep moving on me. This is the one that cracked me up. No, it's not. Damn it. All right, clearly I failed in my job running this show. This is why John is better at. This is only the second time I've run a live show. There was someone that posted that Day of the Dove was a real backslapper. There it is. But if I hit it, will it show up? There we go. That was the one that I thought was funny. Sorry, it took me 3 times to make that, or 4 times to make that happen. And by the way, for those of you who are watching, it looks like almost 100 people are watching right now. If you haven't hit the like button already, please do it. If you're not subscribed to the show, we would really appreciate you subscribing. I really is a lot of fun to actually be doing this live, where we can kind of see your reactions as we're going.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you, everyone who's been joining us live. This is really, really fun.
As you accurately predicted, my number 8 is Where No Man Has Gone Before. I think it is amazing how damn good that pilot is.
Amazing.
I mean, yes, Spock is not quite who he's supposed to be, and the makeup is a little weird, and they're still going to make some changes to the costumes, but Kirk is there, fully formed. And the mix of real intense drama. I mean, essentially, it's the decision to kill your best friend, and real action. And we get to have that Kirk speech, which is so, again, fundamental to who the character is, and fundamental to this is going to be a show that's going to combine action and real drama with ideas. It's absolutely fantastic.
You know, the thing about, and by the way, one of the reasons I knew that you would put Where No Man Has Gone Before on your list, Steve, is because this is also an episode that we referenced many times. You referenced, especially when we were doing the first season of the show on our podcast, because of the friendship, the rivalry, the competitiveness between Jim Kirk and Gary Mitchell. Because that comment, a stack of books with legs, really, really resonated much deeper than I ever thought a throwaway comment like that would do. So, and by the way, I just want to give a shout out to William Foster, who is joining us live here. William Foster works for Mission Control in Houston, and he was part of the Artemis that went around the moon. So, Bill Foster, thank you, A, for joining us live, B, for your support of Enterprise Incidents, and William Foster, I got to tell you, while he was going to work on Artemis, he sent me a direct message and said, "Yeah, I'm going to work and I'm listening to your deep dive of all our yesterdays." And I'm thinking, wow, here's a real Star Trekker listening to Enterprise Incidents. That's pretty cool.
That is really cool.
Steve, and we talked about this before, and it's something I've always felt. I actually love how sort of rough around the edges Where No Man Has Gone Before is, because, you know, this is the first like Star Trek episode with Kirk. But it's amazing how much they got right. It's amazing how much they got right about Star Trek. But no matter what, like you pointed out, Nimoy didn't quite get Spock down just yet. The makeup was different. The uniforms were different. But from Act 1, Scene 1, William Shatner had James Kirk down, proving that Jim Kirk was the role he was born to play. And that is also why I have Where No Man Has Gone Before my list. I will, when I get to that point, I'll just mention it and then move on, since we've already talked about it. But
well, and can I just say that your point is echoed by actually Spock is paying attention to our podcast or to our live show, who says Where No Man is a classic, with the friendship scene right off with the opening scene playing chess. And also, I wanted to say, in regards to Day of the Dove, Maria Torres, who's been a longtime supporter of the Cinephiles and a supporter of Enterprise Incidents, says, by the way, the ending of Day of Dove has a parallel in the first volume of a book series I read long ago and far away, Lord Foulsbane. Maria, I can remember that book too. I read the same thing long ago and far away, so I wanted to bring that up. All right, so what's next?
Next is my number 8, which is Amok Time. And Amok Time took the place which I had before, which was The Enemy Within. But again, you know, Amok Time, look, I feel like if there was any season that got its premiere episode right, it was season 2. Because season 1 started off with the Man Trap, which is not a great episode, not the episode that like said what Star Trek is all about. But like Corbomite Maneuver wasn't ready because of the special effects, and that was the one. And Where No Man Has Gone Before was not a, the way the show turned out to be. So they went with the man trap, and of course, season 3 opened with Spock's brain, which was a really, really bad idea. But season 2, they got it just right, because after all the loyal fans who discovered Star Trek in season 1, they were rewarded with the season 2 opener of Amok Time, which not only was a Spock episode, who was very popular and even eclipsing Captain Kirk, but you got to go to Vulcan, you got to see Spock's wife, you got to see the Vulcan salute and live long and prosper. And the music is so iconic, but of course it is the sacrifice that Kirk makes to get his friend to Vulcan, and ultimately the irony that he is to fight him to save him with that great music. It is a Star Trek classic for true Star Trek fans. Amok Time is my number 8.
And it is my number 7, and I agree, of course, with everything you said. In particular, I think, we've talked about the building of the friendship between the 3 leads and how that starts. We see the beginnings of it in Enemy Within, and then we see, obviously, the relationship with Kirk and Spock in Naked Time and growing throughout. But the moments where Kirk says he's my friend, and then the moment where Spock invites McCoy to his wedding as basically saying, you're my friend, despite the fact that they've been fighting through the entire series. And then, of course, Spock's reaction to discovering that Kirk is alive, that huge emotional outpouring, is one of the great moments in all of Star Trek.
Let me ask you a question. I never realized this. I never thought to ask you this when we did the deep dive. But before Amok Time was filmed, going in production order like we've been doing, had Kirk or Spock ever referred to each other as my friend?
I think you did bring this up in our deep dive. I'd have to listen to it again, but no, I don't think so. Not in that way.
Yeah, it really is like when McCoy says you can't disregard Starfleet orders, and Kirk says, I can't let Spock die, can I? And he goes, he's my friend. He saved my life 100 times over. Isn't that worth a career? So John Kirk says, I don't think so. So in terms of like referring to each other as my friend, but yeah, that's another subtle way in which the friendship just continued to evolve. So you had Amok Time as your number 7. Yes. My number 7 was the episode that moved down from higher on the list, and that is The Conscience of the King. So between your list, Steve, and my list, there are episodes that are on both lists. There are episodes that are on every single list that everyone ever has when they rank their top episodes, right? But then there are episodes that are personal favorites that resonate to you in a way that maybe they didn't resonate to other people. And I think that's what makes each list different. And I think that's what makes each list special. So for everyone following along with us, we all have our lists. And when we're done with this, I definitely would love to see your list by when you post it on our Facebook page. But Conscience of the King is my sort of like personal fave. And I say that because, like another episode on this list, it's an episode I had to grow into. When I first saw Conscience of the King as a sort of younger, even into my teenage years as a Star Trek fan, it was an episode I thought was fine. I thought it was a little slow, not a lot of action. But then as I got older, I really started to see the episode in a new light. And I just think the brilliance that Conscience of the King is about Shakespeare, but ultimately it is Shakespeare because of the way that Kirk is Hamlet in this episode, and the thing where he catches the conscience of the king. And, the actor who played, Kodos or, Caridian, Arnold Moss or Stuart Moss, I always get the name wrong, but, the scene in his quarters where they're going sort of back and forth is just top tier acting and writing. And Barbara Anderson, one of the great female performances on Star Trek, because she starts off the episode really lovely, and then she is a woman a woman scorned, and then she just goes off her rocker. The light in her eyes when it's not Stuart Moss, it is Arnold Moss. Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Lee, for pointing that out. It's Arnold Moss. This is the beauty of the live episode, to be corrected on the spot. Those are true enterprisers. But yes, Conscience of the King is and I love the score. The score by Mullendore, the only score he ever did. The score from Mullendore is just fantastic. So there's my number 7. What is your number 6, mister?
Well, my number 6 is one that we talked about, and I think you predicted. I don't remember if you nailed this one, but it is Space Seed.
Space Seed, yes.
And really, it's all about Montalban. I mean, it's just the charisma coming off him is so powerful. Just with him, the way he looks at a character, you could see the thoughts in his brain. And the battle of wills between him and Kirk, and the way the script is put together. Do I think it's a perfect episode? No. But I really, really, truly love it.
Yes. Yes. Space Seed. I mean, again, it is like so hard to not put this on my top 10. What are you on out of your Vulcan mind putting Space Seed as an honorable mention? But yeah, that's the case.
It's tough.
My number six was the episode you had at your number 8, is Where No Man Has Gone Before. We talked through all that, but yes, Where No Man Has Gone Before is my number 6. Steve, what is your number 5?
Well, this is one that hasn't come up at all. And I actually want to pair this with a question that was asked by a Great Books guy, who says, Scott and Steve, favorite guest appearance or interview during the podcast. Just let's listen to the Shatner interview, which was another wonderful addition to the show. Well, my answer for my favorite guest, and we've had fantastic guests, basically all of them are people that Scott brought in. So that is all Scott, with the exception of John Roca, who I know. Everyone else has been someone Scott brought in. But frankly, there is no comparison to our most frequent guest, and that is director Ralph Sinensky. Having him on the show, that is the thing that made doing this show beyond anything I could have imagined for me.
I agree.
I knew you and I would have great conversations. I knew that we had lots to say about Star Trek. The fact that this guy came along and asked to come on the show, and at 98 and 99 years old, his memory is way better than mine, and wanted, I mean, I think our first conversation with him unedited was 3.5 hours. I mean, it was astounding having him on the show.
I agree 100,000%. To be joined by the great Ralph Sinensky, who was a legend for all of his work, more than 200 hours of episodic television, way beyond Star Trek. But to be joined that very first time by Ralph Sinensky for This Side of Paradise was such a thrill, was such an honor. It was so great to talk with a director of an episode of one of my favorite, literally my favorite show of all time. And I thought, okay, well, we got him, and that was a great conversation. But when I reached around to him and asked him for his second episode that he directed, which of course is my favorite and his favorite as well, and his response was, I thought you'd never ask. So to be joined by Ralph Sinensky for each of the episodes that he directed, and his generosity, his time, his experience, his stories, and most of all, his trust and his friendship. If there is any one thing, in addition to becoming great friends with you, Steve, if there's any one thing that I value above all else on Enterprise Incidents, is to be able to do something that I don't think anyone's ever done before, and that's to do a deep dive with a director on each one of his episodes. So Ralph, if you were listening, we love you. We thank you. We are so grateful. Everyone watching and listening, especially on this live feed, loves you. We are so grateful. Thank you so much, Ralph.
It was such a pleasure. And not only, it wasn't just like we had a great guest. It's that he understood what we were trying to do with the show, is that he wanted to participate in this crazy moment by moment, shot by shot, deep dive. That's what he wanted to, he got it. That was what was so cool about it. And of course, as some other people brought up, of course, we've had other great guests like Walter Koenig, like Adam Nimoy, We had all sorts of people whose names are flying out. Judy Burns was fantastic. Of course, our good friend John Roca. Lots and lots of good guests. But the reason that I wanted to bring up Ralph here is that the episode that is at my number 5 spot is one we haven't even mentioned yet, and that is This Side of Paradise.
I'm so glad you have it on your list.
It's, you know, and it's particularly that last moment. For the first time in my life, I was happy. I mean, and again, it goes to this point I made earlier, which is give Leonard Nimoy an opportunity to show us what a great actor he is. Give him an opportunity to, because, and this is again, I'm not trying to insult Star Wars. That's not what I mean at all. But you don't ask Luke Skywalker to do that, really. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have to play really different things, whereas the Star Trek guys do. And Nimoy hanging from that tree, Nimoy being romantic, Nimoy, you know, getting angry when Kirk calls him on to the Enterprise. And of course, parallel to that is great performance from Shatner. Mm-hmm. And because he has to do this thing, which really is supported by Ralph Sinensky and Jerry Finnerman, where he has to go through this whole emotional transition all by himself and make it all make sense. It's a great episode.
Just to build on that analysis, Steve, the scene in the transporter room between Shatner and Nimoy is excellent. The way you see Nimoy really he's holding on to his cool, and then he loses it. And you just see that Shatner deliberately, I mean, they both play that scene perfectly. They play it perfectly, but also the scene on the bridge when Kirk is alone.
Yeah.
And he does his captain's log, and it's a beautiful, beautiful scene. And it's a pitch perfect performance where Kirk says, I'm beginning to realize how big the ship really is and how quiet. How do you counteract paradise? And then he just, like, you know, puts his hand over his face and he's just contemplating. And then the plant just kind of like leans into the frame and shoots up. And then the camera zooms in. The light on the stage brightens up a little bit. Kurt Shatner turns to the camera with that smile, that blissful smile. He gets it. I mean, it's, and also the way the episode was shot on location, it just felt so open. The way the episode was an allegory for, you know, the hippie movement and, you know, turn on, tune in and drop out, you know, which was always done in such a subtle way. I didn't get it. I am so glad you have This Side of Paradise on your list because it deserves to be. It is a beautiful, beautiful episode. Number 5 on my list is the episode that started it all for me. I've told the story of my first moment before back in the Mirror Mirror actual podcast, so I won't do it again here. But Mirror Mirror, I mean, come on, like what a great idea! It was such a great idea. This mirror universe and the way that the costumes were different and the Jerry Finnerman's lighting was different to make the Enterprise look darker. You know, the music is amazing. And, you know, again, the pace of the episode and Barbara Luna as Marlena Moreau is just such a, wow, unbelievable. And her chemistry with Shatner and the scenes in his quarters and just that great speech in every revolution. There's one man with a vision. And that's Kirk. That's, you know, if you look at Kirk's speech to Spock in Mirror Mirror, and you look at Kirk's speech to Daner, Dr. Elizabeth Daner, at the end of Where No Man Has Gone Before, where he's trying to reason with her, say, you know, if all else, a God needs compassion. What's your prognosis, doctor? And here's Kirk telling Spock, you know, doesn't logic demand that you be a part of this change? And you know, that's another way in which Shatner really had Kirk down. But Mirror Mirror is awesome.
Mirror Mirror it's my number 2. I mean, like, I can't possibly say enough good things about it. What I really discovered as we were doing our episode, and again, sorry about my voice, but is that I think it's the tightest episode, top to bottom in terms of the script. And most importantly, it's the tightest, most ensemble episode. It's the episode where Uhura gets the sign, Sulu gets to shine, Chekhov gets to shine. Scotty has that great moment where he says Jim. I think it's the only time he calls him Jim in the whole show. Right. McCoy gets to make the choice to save Spock's life, possibly sacrificing, meaning he's going to be trapped in this universe. That there's, you know, Kirk has a romantic situation. And of course, bearded Spock is the best. And to be able to do all of that in a 50-minute episode of television is absolutely amazing. It is also just so well done.
It's also unheard of that, if they were going to do Mirror Mirror today, it'd be like a 5-part episode, but they did it
Yeah.
in one. They did it in one.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Mirror Mirror is just the bee's knees. Number 4 on my list, the Doomsday Machine. The Doomsday Machine, like I think if there's any episode that I watch more than any other, it is the Doomsday Machine. Like I just put it on and it's just, I just go with it. It's a great, great ride. I think in terms of pacing, it is the tightest and the tautest episode of Star Trek. The final moments, where Kirk is on the Constellation about to get eaten up by the planet killer, and the countdown and the music. Saul Kaplan's score is just absolutely fantastic, and definitely, I think, influenced John Williams for Jaws. But then, of course, another great guest star, one
Yeah.
of the greats. I would say maybe even better than Ricardo Montalban is William Wyndham as Commodore Decker, and the battle power struggle between Decker and Spock. It's just as good as it gets for Star Trek. If you want action and adventure, this is the one.
Doomsday Machine is my number 4 as well. I mean, it's an absolutely fantastic episode, and I think it is the best in terms of a build to a climax. In terms of a build to a climax, all the tensions coming together to beam Kirk off the Constellation.
Yes, Constellation. Yeah.
Whew. By the way, I should say we had this question come up a while ago, which is from JMB. Could there be a Star Trek trivia contest of Steve versus Scott versus Roca? I will make no comment on who wins in a battle between Mance and Roca. Those battles have been epic and chronicled elsewhere. But I will definitely say the loser would be me. That goes without saying. I would lose that contest.
Yes,
but
yeah.
But and the fact that I struggled to come up, I don't remember all the guest star names. Scott still remembers all of them. I would have to look them up. Like I would definitely lose the contest. But back to Doomsday Machine, not only think that climax is the best in all of Star Trek, I think the idea of everything coming together for the climactic moment of an action story, I in a weird way, I think Doomsday Machine invents that to some degree. And in particular, I would reference something that I think has been actually a plague on a lot of movies, which is the climactic moment of Jaws, which is one of the greatest of all time, is that everything building to a single moment. And I bet money that Steven Spielberg was a Star Trek fan and liked the end of Doomsday Machine.
Here's why I think Steven Spielberg was a Star Trek fan. So if you're watching Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Steve, I might have pointed this out when you had me
I think
on.
you did. I know what you're going to say. Yeah.
With you and John to talk about the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when Roy Neary, Richard Dreyfuss, wakes up at the dining room table in his home after he's had the vision, and he sort of comes to his senses, and he's telling Ronnie, don't worry, I'm going to be fine. Everything's okay. He starts taking down all the news clippings of the UFOs. And for a split second, above the dining room table, you see a model of the Enterprise and of the Klingon warship. It's very, very quick, but it's there. And that is why, of all the things, that's why I think Spielberg was actually a Star Trek fan.
So what's your next one?
My next one, my number 3 episode, we talked about. It's an episode that everyone regards as number 1 when you're talking about the quintessential Star Trek list, is of course the City on the Edge of Forever. It is the Citizen Kane of Star Trek episodes, written by Harlan Ellison with an assist by all of the essential creative geniuses of Star Trek, including Roddenberry, Gene Kuhn, and Bob Justman, and Dorothy Fontana. I think maybe even Stephen Karabatsos took a crack at it, but it is an episode that has it all. Of course, an epic story, an epic romance, and great casting with Joan Collins as Edith Keeler, because her chemistry with Shatner was essential to making that episode believable, that he would have such a big struggle letting her die in order to restore the future. But the whole idea of the Guardian of Forever, it's like if you were going to have like a sort of time capsule of maybe 20 of the greatest television episodes ever produced during the 20th century. Okay. And I'm talking about all of television. City on the Edge of Forever should be in that time capsule. That's how good it is.
It's so interesting to me that both you and I have it at number 3.
Yeah.
And I agree completely with everything you said. And I think it, it's the difference between greatest and favorite, I think, is that we talk about Citizen Kane being the greatest film ever made, and what that means exactly is a complicated thing. I would say, even though in all these lists it frequently comes up at number 1, I doubt it comes up as number 1 on many people's favorites lists. Like people don't. John Roca, by the way, will put it on top of his favorite list, but most people don't go, I'm going to watch Citizen Kane for the 700th time. That's not usually something that people talk about. I think City on the Edge of Forever stands alone in this really interesting way. It's very different from a lot of other Star Trek. 2/3 of it takes place in the past, but the emotional wallop and the power of the dilemma that Kirk faces. What if the only way to save the future is to let the woman I love die? That is just huge and packs this amazing emotional wallop. And I'm going to point it out again. We've said it. I said it when we did the episode. We talked about the comedic episodes of Star Trek. City on the Edge of Forever is genuinely funny multiple times. And I think in particular, it solidifies the Kirk-Spock relationship of as these are really good friends. You know what I mean? And how they work together. It's obviously one of the great episodes, not just of Star Trek, but of television, period.
There's that scene in City when Spock fixes the tricorder and he's able to ascertain, yes, Edith Keeler is the focal point of what caused the time change. And they're watching the alternate future on Spock's tricorder. And Spock makes the comment, he goes, with the bomb and the V2 rockets to carry them, Germany captured the world. And Kirk just whispers, no, like he can't believe that one moment, this butterfly effect, the true example of the butterfly effect in action, that this one little moment of this woman living could just drastically alter the future in such a way. And of course, that moment when Kirk holds McCoy back from saving Edith and he gets hit by the car, and McCoy just, do you know what you just did? And Shatner plays it perfectly. He just pushes McCoy away, doesn't even look at him. And he leans against the wall, and you could see he clenches his fist and bites his finger, and Spock just goes, he knows, Doctor, he knows. And of course, let's get the hell out of here. It's what perfection, And Sub Commander Tao, who was not only a character in the Enterprise incident, but he is one of our Enterprisers, loyal Enterprisers, made a great comment. He goes, the City on the Edge of Forever is one of the few times that having so many writers come in and take a crack at a story actually improved it immensely. So yes, Sub Commander Tao, we completely agree with you, and give our regards to the Romulan commander.
One other thing that just occurred to me about City, one of the big discoveries in doing the show with you, Scott, has been that part of the strength of Star Trek, which I never understood before, was in its contradictions, is that it doesn't just say, here's the moral and this is what's right and the good guys win. It continually says, well, here's the moral for this episode, but actually it's going to be the opposite in some other episode. In City on the Edge of Forever, that is contained in one episode, which is she was right, but at the wrong time.
Absolutely.
Is that contradiction of, yes, we do believe in peace. Yes, we do believe in everything Edith Keeler says. And if Edith Keeler lives and that philosophy is followed, we all die. That contradiction is so powerful, because Star Trek, when it's really good, doesn't actually let you off easy. Star Trek gives you food for thought and go, oh, wow, the world is complicated, rather than here's a bunch of simple solutions.
Talk about food for thought. Here I thought that you and I have sort of repurposed Star Trek in every possible way, even to the point of making us see it in a different way. But you're pointing out that line. And again, I wouldn't call it a throwaway line, but it's not a line that's emphasized. But when Spock goes, she was right, but at the wrong time. I never really truly thought about the contradiction of that one single comment about that, how that just lays, that speaks for the entire episode itself. And you're right. She was right, but at the wrong time. How could someone be right, but at the wrong time? That makes absolutely no sense. But in the case of Sitting on the Edge of Forever, it makes all the sense in the galaxy. All right.
So my number 2 we've already talked about, which is Mirror Mirror. What is your number 2?
My number 2 is your number 1. It is Balance of Terror. And I thought about this, I sort of knew what I was going to do for number 1. And I thought, oh, well, I guess that makes City on the Edge of Forever my number 2. But see, this is where doing our deep dive for the whole series made me go, wait just a minute, not so fast. And I thought a lot about the conversation that you and I had on Balance of Terror. I thought about your reasoning for why you think that this is, in your opinion, a better episode personally for you than Sitting on the Edge of Forever. And I agree with everything you said. I mean, I vividly remember so much about that conversation. That was a great, great conversation. I definitely would recommend, if you have not heard our deep dive on Balance of Terror, it was one of our very best. But it is just what, I mean, first of all, there's the great drama with Styles because of his bigotry towards Spock. There's the great parallel, the respect. They never saw each other face to face until the end, but there's this respect that Kirk and the Romulan commander have for each other, and they're able to ascertain what they're going to do. And I'm not going to make that same mistake again. And just also Shatner's performance in Balance of Terror was very right on point. He didn't dial it up, a little much. Sometimes he was very, I would say, dialed back in all the right ways. And the bookend of that episode, where you start in the chapel and at the end of the episode, the chapel becomes a morgue. It is another episode like the Doomsday Machine, where if I just want to just sort of like put on a Star Trek episode to chill out and just have it on and just, this is what I love about this show. Balance of Terror is another one of those episodes.
It's funny, we're doing a live show, so I can't beep this out, but I believe when I rewatched it, and you always have the thing, if you haven't watched something in a while, like, is this really as good as I think that it is? And of course it was, and I believe that I texted you right when I finished it. That is one fucking great episode of television. Because yes, it is so good top to bottom. The bookends, as you mentioned, are so powerful. Kirk is, we talk about Kirk being our hero. And for me, definitely, Kirk is one of the great models of leadership. And there's no episode, I think, that better exemplifies that in Balance of Terror. And having to deliver that news to in what you call the morgue at the end, like that's part of the leadership. There'll be no bigotry, leave your bigotry in your quarters, there's no room for it on the bridge. That's part of his leadership. You see the calculating Kirk who's continuing to come up with the ideas. You're reckoning with this potential of starting a world war, because this is right in the middle of the Cold War. And of course, one of the foundational Star Trek ideas is the enemy is actually just someone we don't understand. Is that the fact that the Romulan commander and Captain Kirk, in another reality, I could have called you friend. I mean, what
a great line. What a great moment. Oh my God. And also, of course, you have to mention a scene that must have been inspired, or at least in part by Roddenberry when he did his rewrite of Balance of Terror, by the scene between Captain Pike and Dr. Boyce in the cage. The scene in Kirk's quarters when Kirk is feeling the burden of command. We are seeing the burden weigh heavily on him. What if I make the wrong decision? And then just as he's about to walk out the door, he says, I don't expect an answer. And that great, great line from Dr. McCoy, he goes, I've got one. He goes, something I heard them say to a customer. What exactly was he referring to when he said something I heard them say to a customer?
I believe he says, I think the line is something I seldom say to a customer, is that he's talking about to someone who's sick, someone who's a patient of his. He doesn't say this to them.
Oh, I see. But it's such a great line when he goes, don't destroy the one named Kirk. Like, is there ever been a better moment between Kirk and McCoy, then that moment in Balance of Terror, don't destroy the one named Kirk. And then Kirk adds it, saying, you just see McCoy, he's on the verge of tears.
Yeah.
Like after the exchange, like Kirk walks out and McCoy needs a moment. That all these little subtleties that you and I have poured over ad nauseum on this podcast. And that's because the show just really freaking holds up. And boy, does it deserve everything, all the attention and all the detail and all of the love and passion that we have shown, that all of the enterprises have shown by following us and committing, because, this is not like a 30 or 40-minute podcast. Some of our podcasts have run almost 3 hours, and you've been there with us for every single minute, and we are very, very, very grateful. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to say one more thing about this. It's a theme that has come up a lot, and particularly come a lot as we've gone through our favorite episodes, is family. And I think what's really interesting is I think that, we've talked about that the person who really solidified the fact that this is a family is Gene Kuhn. That's when he came in, that really coalesced. But in fact, the pieces were all there, because you have the enemy within scenes. You have the naked time scenes that we talked about. You have this incredible scene that you just described so well with McCoy. Those are all showing the seeds that you could see the actors and the writers writing to this idea that these people are brothers, that they're best friends, that they're really, really important to each other. And then Gene Kuhn solidifies that, I think. But again, it's I'm going to say it again, but it's giving these actors the chance to play these moments. Like, I'm sure when D. Kelly got that script, he went, oh, I can do something with this.
Yeah, for sure. And, before I do my number one, because you all know what it is anyway. Steve, you mentioned, the guests that we've had, obviously Ralph, of course, to be able to close out basically our deep dive of the original series by getting a special interview with Shatner himself, the man himself, William Shatner, who normally does not do podcasts, did ours. And that was an absolute honor to sort of bring the original series to almost close with our deep dive, with our conversation with the man himself, William Shatner. He was very generous with his time and extremely philosophical during that interview, but also, like you said, Walter Koenig, David Gerald joined us twice. Obviously, Johnny Roca joined us 4 times, and so did Dave Rossi. Laurie Ulster joined us twice. And then you also have Rob Burnett, Darren Doctorman, Mark Altman, Jim Brooks, Becky Deanna, Judy Burns joined us for Tholium Web. So for all of the guests who joined us, if they're listening or even if they're not listening, we are grateful for your time and your insight and for making Enterprise Incidents truly a better podcast show. And that brings us to my number one. And yes, of course, it is Metamorphosis. And, people, here's the thing that I discovered, because when we started doing this, Steve, I started engaging more with fans on the various Facebook groups, the Star Trek Facebook groups. And whenever somebody posted a photo or made a mention of Metamorphosis, like, oh, Metamorphosis is on H&I tonight, and they post a photo, or somebody just would say, oh, here's Glenn Corbett as from Cochrane. The comments that would follow would be people saying, wow, Metamorphosis is so good. It's my favorite episode. It's my favorite episode. And I went, oh, I guess I'm not alone. And the reason the Metamorphosis really stands out above all the others is because it's another episode that I, like Conscience of the King, I had to grow into. When I saw it when I was a kid, I liked it. I thought it was fine. I liked it just fine, but it took getting older to appreciate the episode more. The story, the performances, all the scenes where Shatner is trying to reason with the companion. William Shatner just really, really was at the top of his game. The performance of Eleanor Donahue, I think that she is very overlooked as a guest star, because she too has to go through a massive arc in that episode, showing incredible range from being very sort of businesslike as Commissioner Hedford to breaking down, realizing she blew it with her life, to just truly beautiful and angelic when she merges with the companion. But also Jerry Finnerman's cinematography in that episode. I don't think there is a better episode of the original series when it comes to the lighting and the cinematography. All of the scenes on the planet with that purple sky and the cloud and the way that they had to like not move so the cloud would sort of stay where it was. The score, the music by George Dunning is absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. And again, you got great writing from the man himself, Gene Kuhn. And this is where I wanted to talk about Devil in the Dark, because if you take Devil in the Dark and turn it into a love story, the result is Metamorphosis, because it's the same thing at play. They don't know what this thing is, like in the Horde. They don't know what it is, but it's threatening them, so they got to kill it. And then they realize it's a mother protecting its young. And then it changes the whole scope of the story. Well, when they realize that the companion is a female, it changes the whole scope of the story. It's very much like Devil in the Dark in that way. But it is an episode whenever I watch it, and I don't watch it all the time like Doomsday Machine and Mirror Mirror and City and Balance of Terror and so on, because I don't want to get sick of it. But when I do watch it, it affects me emotionally, even after all these years, all these decades, since I discovered Star Trek as a syndication generation member. But yep, number one stays Metamorphosis.
You know what just occurred to me, and Conscience of the King and Metamorphosis are not on my top 10 list. I grew so much more appreciation for both of them through our conversations. Here's the thing just occurred to me is, you know how there's sort of a thing of there's the easy stuff, whether it is movies or books or plays or music or food or wine, where a little kid will love it. You don't need any sophistication. You don't need any previous knowledge to appreciate the thing, and then there are other things where you really have to understand this about classical music or understand this about movements in the art world to look at that piece of modern art or to look at that 17th century play or whatever and go, oh, I get this. That's what Metamorphosis and Conscience of the King are, is that Conscience of the King is not a favorite episode of mine, but in thinking about it and analyzing it, I go, oh my God, there's so much here. There's so much. And I had to know a lot about Star Trek and about the direction. We found so much about Jim Kirk's character and about his origin through Conscience of the King and all of those ideas. And as you described, all of the references to Hamlet, to Macbeth, to all of that stuff, it's like, oh, as a kid, there was no way I could appreciate this. As a grown-up, analyzing it deeply, I could. And I think Metamorphosis is this, it's not a showy episode. It's not thrilling and exciting like Mirror Mirror or Doomsday Machine. It doesn't have broad action or, very, very, deep, intense emotional experiences like City on the Edge of Forever. But it is so fundamentally Star Trek. And the characters really shine. And of course, it's Ralph's beautiful direction. And as you said, Jerry Finnerman's cinematography is that, okay, you spent some time, you love Star Trek. Now go back and watch this again and see what you think. And your thoughts will change. And then I would also suggest maybe listen to our Enterprise Incidents episode and then watch it again and see if your perceptions of it change. That's one of the signs of a great bit of television. It's not the first time you watch it. It's the fifth time. And what do you get?
Absolutely. And also on top of everything else, I think one of the things, and we pointed this out, especially you, Steve, is that one of the things that makes Kirk such a great leader is when he admits when he's wrong. Like look at Aaron the Mercy, look at Devil in the Dark, and look at Metamorphosis. When McCoy points out to him, he said, you're a soldier so often you forget that you're also a diplomat. Try waving a carrot instead of a stick. And you see the light go off in Kirk's head, and he smiles and goes, okay, get the universal translator. Let's try to figure this out. Anyway, so much about that episode. And Sergio Rojo, one of our loyal and favorite Enterprisers, said Metamorphosis has the perfect crew, the perfect director, and the perfect screenwriters. Yes, there is a big reason why Metamorphosis is not only my favorite, but also Ralph Sinetsky's favorite episode. And Ralph, again, we thank you for everything not just with Star Trek, but throughout your incredible career. And like Steve, just like what were some of the episodes that you had on your honorable mention that just didn't make the final cut?
Well, honestly, there could have been 20 or 30 of them. Neither of us put our namesake, the Enterprise incident, on our top 10 list. It's a great episode, one you and I both love. Day of the Dove didn't make my cut, although it certainly could have. Let That Be Your Last Battlefield didn't make my cut, although it certainly could have. Journey to Babel. Plus, there's just so many. You know, what's really interesting, I think, is yes, I would say easily there are 20 great episodes of Star Trek that all could have been on my top 10 list. I think the middle level of Star Trek is almost more impressive, that there are probably 40 episodes that are really good that I wouldn't put on my top 10 list, but are really, really, yeah, that one's good. That one's good. That, you know, someone I saw in the chat recently brought up Obsession, another Ralph Sadensky episode, which is one that would never go on my top 10 list. But man, that's a solid episode of television. How about you? What are some of your honorable mentions?
Well, I mean, like, wasn't there a joke on Futurama where there was a reference to Star Trek and it said 79 episodes, 30 good ones, or something like that? I might be paraphrasing. I'm sure someone listening can comment on the chat and say, yep, that was Futurama. But when it comes to my honorable mentions, I could have a top 20 that would be just as strong as my top 10. But just throwing out some episodes here, like I mentioned, The Enemy Within, Naked Time, Arena, The Squire of Gothos is an episode that I really, really love because of William Campbell. Tomorrow is Yesterday, This Side of Paradise, Spacey, Devil in the Dark, Who Mourns for Adonais, Journey to Babel, The Deadly Years, Trouble with Tribbles, Piece of the Action, By Any Other Name, The Ultimate Computer, Is There in Truth No Beauty, The Tholium Web, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. Yep, I got them all written down right here. I'm just reading off the list, you know. What are you going to do?
I mean, they're all, well, and we've seen going through the comments as we've had this conversation, so many people that put some of the episodes you just mentioned in their top 5, in their number 1. And that's because this is a really good episode, really good television series, Star Trek. I think it's got legs and it'll go places. I think it's pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Scott. First of all, this has been a fantastic conversation. Do you have time to maybe take a few questions if people have any questions they'd like to ask us?
If you got questions, throw them out. And I just want to say,
doing a live show,
while we are waiting for some of those questions to come in, I just want to give a shout out to everyone to once again, thank you so much for following us. And big thanks to everyone at Trek Movie for naming Enterprise Incidents the best Star Trek podcast of 2022. That was a very, very, very nice surprise and a true honor because there are literally hundreds and hundreds of Star Trek podcasts. To be singled out as the best just makes us very, very happy. And we ended 2022 with the original series. We were done. We did our wrap and that was it. But we just wanted to do one final episode on the original series because on the next episode of Enterprise Incidents, we're going to begin our deep dive of the animated series. And we're going to start off with a preview of the animated series. But Steve, what kind of questions? What are people asking us?
Well, I don't see. Wait, I see a couple one coming up here. Hold on. Okay, so I've got some questions here. First of all, I just wanted to put up this is not a question, but Great Books Guy who wrote, as I recall, the podcast for episode for Plato's Stepchildren was surprisingly powerful when Dan discussed what episode meant for him, despite being a less than stellar episode of TOS. I couldn't agree more, and it's something that we discovered doing the Cinephiles that also has definitely happened here. Is I think some of the lesser episodes have been some of our best conversations.
I agree. I'm thinking of Miri as an episode that was never one that I loved, but you're when you brought up the cycle, the like 80-year cycle or whatever it was, that really blew my mind. Return of the Archons, the Savage Curtain, and yes, definitely Plato's Stepchildren because I mean, not a great episode, but what it meant to Dan Matson and for him to really go deep and share his story and so personal story. And he's just a great guy and a really good friend. So that's a great example of a podcast of an episode that not a great episode, but definitely a great conversation.
All right. I got some questions loaded up. Give me 1 sec here. First question we've got, which is from Mike Lansky, who wants to know, where is Errand of Mercy on your list? What do you think, Scott?
Okay, Errand of Mercy is definitely in my 10 to 20. I don't have the number because I didn't rank him that far. Errand of Mercy is an excellent episode. Gotta love the first appearance of the Klingons. Gotta love John Colicos' core. And again, this is the episode where Kirk basically said, "Yep, I'm wrong." Well, no one wants war. So great episode, Errand of Mercy. What about you, Steve?
For me, it's exactly what you said. It's probably in my next 10, somewhere in there, or next 15. It's a really good episode. And it was really what solidified that thought for me of, oh, Star Trek is all about jumping into the contradictions, because here, in Taste of Armageddon, Kirk jumps in, solves the problem, says, I know what's right. Errand of Mercy, Kirk jumps in to solve the problem. He's not right. Like that is the fact that a show is willing to reverse their pattern in order to come up with a different idea. That's pretty impressive. All right, next question here. Okay, Scott from Roger Dennis. What is your favorite Kirk monologue?
Oh, well, that has to go to Risk is Our Business. I mean, I remember you pointed out when we talked about this episode in Return to Tomorrow, you can't mess with the success. And that Kirk speech, may be a bit over the top in the eyes of some people, but I think Shatner just crushed it. By the way, Roger, that is an amazing question. What's your favorite Kirk monologue? Because there are many. There's the we're not going to kill today speech from A Taste of Armageddon. There's the in every revolution, one man has a vision from Mirror, Mirror. There's the whole exchange with the companion in Metamorphosis. But, like it's a quintessential iconic Star Trek moment, when Kirk says, that's what the starship is all about. That's why we're aboard her. That is the Captain Kirk that I would follow into an active volcano, ladies and gentlemen.
I think Risk is Our Business is the most quintessential Kirk monologue. By the way, there are also all of the I'm going to talk a computer into destroying itself monologues. And there's also Of All Else a God Needs Compassion, which is his first great speech. I got to go with Mirror, Mirror. There's something about that, because it's not just the monologue and Shatner's performance, which is fantastic, but it's also the situation is so dramatic, because we're literally, the clock is counting down and he's got to convince this guy. That one is absolutely fantastic. Let's see. Here's an interesting thought. This is not a question, but Eric Wolf says, can you invite Ralph to a live show like this? I guess it is a question, actually.
That's a really great question. And I would love to have Ralph back on at some point. Ralph, if you're listening, we would love to have you back on Enterprise Incidents at some point, especially if we could just get into a more general conversation about not only what Star Trek meant for you, and especially after doing your deep dives with us, but also just to talk more about your career, all the other shows you've done, the highlights for you. But what I will say is, I think one of the, one thing I forgot to mention when we talked about Ralph is, it felt to me that Ralph really enjoyed doing Enterprise Incidents, that reassessing his time doing Star Trek, and maybe some of the less pleasant ones at the time turned out to be, fond memories after all. And to be able to bring that to Ralph, makes me feel really good. I know it does for you too, Steve.
Absolutely. I don't know if doing a live episode with Ralph would work or not, but the idea of being able to share with all of you the joy of just sitting in his presence would be pretty cool, because
yeah,
he's just as cool as you think he is. He really is. Yeah. So our next question is from Justin Welsh, who asks, are you going to do your worst episodes? My feeling is no. What do you think, Scott?
No, we're not going to do our worst episodes. But Steve, when push comes to shove, what do you think is the worst episode? Just for the sake of this conversation.
So before, when we started, it was very obvious in my mind that it was When the Children Shall Lead, which is heinous. It is a terrible episode. I don't know. It's so hard, because as we went along, some of the conversations, like Plato's Stepchildren, I genuinely did enjoy, but going moment by moment through a bad episode of Star Trek was not pleasant. It was really unpleasant.
Right.
And so it got more painful as we went. So by the time we got to Whom Gods Destroy, I was just furious. I just was like, it was so torturous because I had to write down every line in the episode because that's what I do to prepare for the show. And writing down, it's like if I'm writing down every line of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, that's kind of a joy because every line is so great. If I'm writing down every line of Whom Gods Destroy, it's like, oh my God. So I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think before we did the podcast, Steve, I think it would have been easier for me to say, oh, the worst one is the alternative factor. The worst one is And the Children Shall Lead. But after doing the deep dive, because there were quite a few episodes from later in the third season that I have not watched in many, many years, maybe even a couple decades. So when we did our deep dive of the Mark of Gideon, I realized, you know what? That is a big swing and like the mighty Casey struck out with that episode. It is an awful episode. It was demoralizing to have to do a deep dive on that one. So for me, my new favorite worst episode of Star Trek is the Mark of Gideon.
Yeah, it's really bad. This is not a question, but hey, this Philip Bryan says this is the best Trek podcast. It's not even close.
Well, we thank you, this Philip Bryan. We really appreciate your support of Enterprise Instance. I just want to read one question from Great Books Guy. Okay, and his question is this: what is your favorite Beatles album? And what is your favorite Ruddles song? So just to answer, because obviously, as you can tell, if there's one thing I love as much as Star Trek, it is the Beatles. And Steve knows that for sure. I know, Steve, you love the Beatles too. My favorite Beatles album is A Hard Day's Night because I like the early stuff and I love the vibrancy of A Hard Day's Night. My favorite Ruddles song is Number One. So there you go.
I don't have a Ruddles song answer. I go back and forth about my favorite Beatles album. I am a later Beatles guy. I mean, I love all of them, of course. Revolver, which is mid Beatles, is probably my favorite mid Beatles album. It's weird, and it's actually gotten better since the documentary came out. But the one that makes me happiest is Let It Be. I've always, when I'm just in a mood, or like if I have a really rough day and I work really, really hard and I just want to let everything go, I put on Let It Be. And now having watched the making of that, I'm so much more in love with that album. Here we have a question from Bob Hogston, who says the TOS music is also very unique, almost another character. I've never seen a TV series with such dominant music. What do you think, Scott, of the TOS music?
That, Bob, is an excellent observation and one that I certainly agree with 100%. Steve and I have talked about the music of Star Trek many times. And even in our deep dive of Amok Time, we broke down the music while we were breaking down the episode itself. And I completely agree. The music for the original series is so iconic, quintessential. It's such a standout. It absolutely is a character unto itself with the show, just like the cinematography was a character unto itself. And I have to say that when you compare the music from the later shows to the music of the original series, it is no comparison. It is no contest. It is absolutely the music of the original series still holds up and it is still great. What is your answer to that, Steve?
I basically, I just agree with everything you said. The music is incredible. And it's so funny. I mean, I can't think of another show that has so many recognizable themes. And part of that is that, like the Amok Time music, so they got played in multiple episodes, but they're so powerful. And what's really interesting too is how music, I think the music that is from This Side of Paradise ends up getting used in Metamorphosis. Is that right? Or no, it's it's the music in Shore Leave is Ruth's theme that gets used later on. It's like how a theme that can be introduced for one thing evolves and becomes powerful with another thing. The music obviously is great.
Yeah, sure.
Let's see. I had another question I wanted. Here's one. This is from Spock, of course. Which episode do you think had the most interesting background regarding creating the story, drafts, etc.? For me, there's no question it's City on the Edge of Forever.
Yeah,
that's got the most interesting background.
That's for sure. That's the default answer for sure. Is the making of the City on the Edge of Forever. because they worked on it for so long. And like Sub Commander Tao pointed out, it had a hand on by basically everybody in a way that it improved the episode. Where sometimes there's too many cooks in the kitchen, it can go the other way. But I think in terms of it going the other way, I think it's just as interesting to read how Dorothy Fontana's third season story, Joanna, about McCoy's daughter, how that episode turned into The Way to Eden. Like, how does that happen? By the way, Way to Eden, I have a much, much better appreciation for, because our guest on that episode, Neil Shirley, who I did not mention before when I was thanking all of our guests, he was a fantastic addition to that episode on The Way to Eden. Thank you, Neil, for joining us and making that a great conversation. But yeah, I got to, and also I just want to point out that in terms of all of the research that we've done on Enterprise incidents to give you every possible backstory possible, of course, we defaulted to the 3-volume series by Mark Cushman. These are the voyages. But there's also Inside Star Trek by Herb Saul and Bob Justman. There's the Star Trek Compendium by Alan Asherman. There's the 50-Year Mission by Mark Altman and Edward Gross. And of course, there's The Making of Star Trek, which was written back in '68 while the show was still in production by Stephen E. Whitfield and Gene Roddenberry. So many, like I would, and of course, I would say Memory Alpha, the website Memory Alpha was an invaluable resource. But for sure, for everyone listening, if you have not yet gotten the 3-volume series, These Are the Voyages, or the 2-volume series, The 50-Year Mission, those are must reads.
I've got another question here. Scott, Michael Lilienthal would like to know, is the animated series canon?
Oh, absolutely it's canon. The animated series is so canon. First of all, we would not be advancing onto the animated series if it was not canon. But there are so many elements to the animated series that make it canon. For one thing, we find out what Kirk's middle name is. So we found that out in the animated series. And then the final episode of the animated series, the Counterclock Incident, we met the first captain of the Enterprise, or at least that Enterprise, which was Robert April. So not only is the animated series canon, but we're going to continue our arc, our through line, our serialized vision of Star Trek, extending the animated series the same courtesy that we gave to the original series.
So my feeling is, yes, of course it is canon. I also think that this whole idea of things being canon and not canon is like a hard and fast rule. It's not, you create a show linearly. You don't know where the show is going to go. And so the things that stick are canon. James R. Kirk is not canon, because that's not the way that we went. And so I think it's a little, I'm certain that we'll find things in the animated series where we go, come on, that's not really.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
I think, Scott, we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay. Let's see here. I've got a whole bunch of great questions, and I'm going to try to find a couple of good ones. This one I'm interested in hearing your opinion on. Rad would like to know, do you think Scotty would have made a good starship captain?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because we saw him be a good starship captain. Look at the way he handled the situation in Friday's Child when they got the second distress call, and Scotty, relying on intuition, said, ignore it. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. The way he handled, A Taste of Armageddon.
Yeah, it's a great one.
Not lowering the shields, despite being ordered by Ambassador Fox to lower the shields. Hands down. The fact that Sulu got to command a starship like Excelsior and that Scotty never got to command a starship, I'm going to say that was by choice, because Scotty's happy place was in engineering.
So that's what I was going to say. Is like, do I think that Scotty would have made a good starship captain? Absolutely. Really solid, and a heck of a lot better than some of the ones who went crazy and had a lot of problems.
Sure.
I think he would have held up a lot better than some of those guys. But yes, he would make a good starship captain. he is a great engineer. Not
Bingo.
everybody wants the top job. They're not supposed to have it. All right, let me look for one more question here. And like I said, there's a whole, we literally, if we could spend 2 or 3 hours because you guys have so many great questions. All right. Robert Collins asks, question, which guests really helped bring TOS to life to you in an unexpected way? We've
Robert
already,
Collins.
what?
That's a great question.
Yeah, we've already talked about Ralph Sinensky. Obviously, I'd say that's the number one. I assume you mean guests on our show. Having Adam Nimoy on was so great. It was absolutely fantastic. He just his way of thinking. He thinks like a director, and so on the one hand, even if he wasn't Leonard Nimoy's son, he was a great guest. Then the insights, the personal insights to what life was like with his dad, amazing.
I thought that Robert was referring to guest stars who appeared on the actual original series. If that's the case, I mean, look, that's a really good question. And I think that the easiest way to answer that is to just reference the great guest stars who just made the episodes go above and beyond. Like, of course, William Wyndham, Joan Collins for City, Ricardo Montalban for Space Seed, but also the underrated, overlooked guests. Like I said, like Eleanor Donahue. I really feel like she does not get enough credit for making Metamorphosis as great as that is. Same with Barbara Anderson for The Conscience of the King, and the guest who, like you pointed out, Steve, she was terrific in Day of the Dove, Susan Howard, because she never betrayed Kang. She never betrayed him. Like, just towards the end, she says, like, I'm a Klingon. Would I lie for them? Like she's really doing what she feels is right, because like she was convinced that, wow, these guys are actually telling the truth. And of course, Kang, Michael Ansara really just crushed it for me. But also, Mariette Hartley in Our Yesterdays. That final shot when she just turns around with the wind blowing her hair and the tear coming down her cheek. Like you pointed out, Steve, it's one of the most heartbreaking moments of the series.
Well, I think those are great answers, but now I have no idea which question Robert Collins was asking, but now I would like to ask you the version that I answered, which is, what guests did we have on our show that brought Star Trek to life to you in an unexpected way?
The ones you mentioned, I mean, nobody more than Ralph. Ralph, if you would have told this 6-year-old kid back in 74 that he would one day do a scene by scene, moment by moment analysis of each one of his episodes, I think I would have, died and gone to heaven, because that would have been, the fact that we got to do that, I'm grateful for it. But I think David Gerrold's conversation during The Trouble with Tribbles was fantastic.
Oh yeah, that was great.
Fantastic episode. I really loved Adam's conversation about All Our Yesterdays. His insight, because the show was ending, how what was going on with his family at that time and his relationship with his dad. But he's also a director himself and had great insight onto what worked and what didn't with that episode. And just, after, being with us now for 91 years, having that philosophical conversation with Shatner, even though it was basically to promote his new book, Boldly Go, which is a fantastic book, and I strongly urge you read it. It's on Amazon.com if you want to buy it. It's called Boldly Go. I think to hear such profound philosophical, anecdotes from Shatner after doing this podcast was like, icing on the cake.
Yeah. And I think that's all the time we have for questions, but I, for one, Scott, I really enjoyed doing this live show. I really enjoyed, you guys had so many great questions. Like I was trying to star them all as they were going by, but they're going by so fast. Maybe we should do another one of these just to do a Q&A, just to answer some fans' questions.
That's a great idea. That is a great idea. And I also think that maybe when we are done with our deep dive of the animated series, maybe we do a top 5 of that just like we did a top 10 of the original series. But absolutely positively, thank you for joining us for this episode. And for everyone who joined us live, thank you so much. We will do another live episode just for you, just to answer your questions, because we do, I don't know if you notice, Enterprisers, but we love talking about Star Trek.
It's very, very true. Do we have any other announcements we need to make before we wrap this up?
Well, we just want to say once again that any help you can give us, any support, any generosity by supporting us on by going on Anchor and making a donation to support us on a weekly basis. Now that we are moving forward with Enterprise Incidents with the animated series, any help you can give us would be great. Make sure you share us on your social media platforms, spread the word about Enterprise Incidents. The entire original series is there. We are hiding in plain sight for Star Trek fans to discover Enterprise Incidents, and whether it's right now or 6 months from now or 6 years from now, we hope that people will continue to discover Enterprise Incidents. So please do spread the word, and make sure you go to Apple Podcasts. Make sure you write a review for Enterprise Incidents. We are grateful for all of the reviews and reactions we have gotten on our Apple Podcasts. Make sure you subscribe or follow us on our Facebook page, which is Enterprise Incidents. And while you are there, make sure you list your top 10 episodes of the original series, your favorites in order.
Sorry, things cut out on me. And if you want to reach me, you can do it at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. You could follow the Cinephiles. And since Scott and we just did our first live show, the Cinephiles does a live show every month. And tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pacific time, that's Sunday, January 8th, we are going to do a live show. It's our annual talk about the year 2022, make predictions for 2023, and mostly just have a good time with some of our favorite people, including, I hope, my good friend Scott Mance, who's going to join us. So that's tomorrow on the Cinephiles. How would people find you, Scott?
You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. And I just want to say, Steve Morris, I'm just so glad that you are feeling better and that you are feeling well enough to make this live episode happen. I know you worked really, really hard to do this. And especially, again, not only a big thank you for that beautiful intro that you did just for the purpose of this live episode, but for editing all of the hard work. And I know how much hard work it is and how much time it takes to edit each and every episode so that every episode of Enterprise Incidents sounds like a top tier professional podcast. And I'm grateful to you for that. I'm grateful to you for your friendship. I'm grateful to you for coming after me to do this podcast in the first place. And especially for, as you are still on the mend, for making this episode happen. Because when I did our deep dive of the Ultimate Computer, I had COVID, and Dave Rossi joined us for that episode. So I was perfectly happy to let him take over on that one because I was still feeling under the weather. So please continue to get better. And again, everyone, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching live. Coming up next on Enterprise Incidents, we begin our deep dive of the animated series. The next episode is our animated series preview. And the episode after that, we will really get into it with the first episode of the animated series, Beyond the Farthest Star. So coming next on Enterprise Incidents, our preview of the animated series. So join us then. And until then, of course, keep going
boldly.